bring up Final Fantasy VI and one of my favorite all-time gold standard RPGs, Chrono Trigger. And Chrono Trigger is one of my favorite games of all time. And I kind of wanted to discuss because you had brought up, Dan, how much you think Final Fantasy VI is a better game than Chrono
It
Trigger.
is.
And I wanted I wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on why you think it is.
I don't think it is. I know it is. It's a better game for a lot of reasons. I mean, I the last time I tried to play Chrono Trigger, I couldn't even get into it.
Okay.
I couldn't even get into it. It was boring. It was
But
tedious.
why? Boring and tedious. I
Yeah.
mean, come on. You've got so many different side quests. You start out at a millennial fair. I mean, it's time travel. The characters are lovable. Not a few, but the characters are lovable, and it's got everything you could ever want from a game. Now, Final Fantasy VI has plenty of characters and great story, and I would argue a much better final boss than Lavos was. But I just didn't quite get the emotional feels as I did with Chrono Trigger.
Final Fantasy VI has way more emotional feels than Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger has a silent protagonist who is like basically a self-insertion character. He is Pants. We have Chrono Pants. You put on your Chrono Pants, and then you sort of experience the world through him. He's not a character. He doesn't exist. He's just sprites. Like there's no. He doesn't have a personality. There's nothing to get attached to. There's nothing to sympathize or empathize with. He's a blank slate character. And the rest of the characters are
You
just kind of obnoxious.
you could say that about Chrono being silent, but might I argue about that is in The Legend of Zelda, we have had Link as the protagonist for almost every single game in the series, and he has never once spoken a single line of dialogue. It has always been text, and people love Link as a character.
Sure, but now we're talking about two completely different styles of storytelling. The Legend of Zelda tells
Yes,
its stories through its world. It tells its stories through the extensive lore. It doesn't tell its story through the actions and speech of its protagonist or supporting characters. In the later games, a little bit more, but especially if we go back in the beginning, there was no character interaction between Link and the other characters in the game world, and if there was, it was extremely minimal. The storytelling was done by other methods, whereas in a game like Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, they both fall under that umbrella of Square RPGs, where the storytelling element of the game is very, very tightly based on the interactions of the characters. And having a protagonist that doesn't interact, it really mitigates by a lot how much emotional connection you can possibly have to that character and that world.
and I get that. I can get that, and I definitely will say that I will give the edge to character development and extrapolation upon those lines to Final Fantasy VI. But I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. But for me, there's always been something about Chrono Trigger that has just been dear to my heart. I don't know if it's the techniques, like the techs, that your characters can do, the magic system, which I thought was incredibly unique. Antipode is such a fun spell. Luminaire, I mean, nuke the whole screen, why don't you? There's just so much about that game, and then the side quests are just fantastic. I feel like they're with Final Fantasy VI. The second half of the game is a lot of you can do this to learn more about the characters, or you can ignore it. It's up to you,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Kind of the same, but the story in Chrono Trigger drives you more to uh, the characters' endings and whatnot through its level design and whatnot, and areas and time periods and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, it's always been a tough decision for myself personally because you've got kind of 50-50. I mean, it's really hard, but I still got to give that edge to Chrono Trigger.
It's a very beloved game. A lot of people really love it. I played through it once, when it came out when I was a kid. I think I played through it one more time, many years later on an emulator. But I don't think I finished it that second time because I got bored. Just got bored.
And that's a valid reason. I mean, if it doesn't grip you, if it doesn't bring you into the world, it doesn't draw you in. Um, I feel like then it makes sense to not finish. If it doesn't grab your attention. I mean, it's like, okay, I'll play it through and the first time and then the second time. But see, the new game plus aspect of it and the multiple different endings, I think, is a very, very unique thing that Square did there. And that definitely bears mention because
Yeah, it was novel at the
honestly,
time.
it was novel
Yeah.
at the time. But
Yeah.
what other game series or what other game during that time had 16 different endings and you could New Game Plus and keep all your stuff aside from story items?
Yeah, I mean, New Game Plus was cool, but again, if I'm not enjoying the game, then New Game Plus is kind of meaningless for me.
And that makes sense. I would say that. Now, that being said, what I would like is for our listeners to hop on our socials, either on Twitter or Facebook. We'll drop those at the end of the show. You can contact us and connect with us there, and let us know, what do you guys think? What do you feel is the better game, Final Fantasy
They're gonna
VI
tear me apart.
or Chrono Trigger? And you know what? Sometimes that's the way it goes. But I have